afternoon. I'm Victoria Marshall with the latest news from the Washington Watch news desk. Over the weekend, the Israeli military announced that 6 hostages had been found dead in a tunnel underneath the southern Gazan city of Rafah. These hostages were murdered by Hamas several days before the Israeli Defense Force recovered their bodies. One of the hostages, Hirsch Goldberg Poland, was a U.S. citizen. President Joe Biden told reporters after a meeting with his Security Council on Monday that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu isn't doing enough to negotiate a ceasefire deal with Hamas. This was Netanyahu's response.
These murderers executed 6 of our hostages. They shot them in the back of the head. That's what's changed. And now after this, we're asked to show seriousness? We're asked to make concessions? What message does this send Hamas? It says, kill more hostages, murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions.
Netanyahu also told reporters that Israeli defense forces will not leave the Philadelphia corridor, the Gazan side of the border with Egypt, in the foreseeable future. Hamas is demanding a complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has told families of U.S. hostages that Biden is considering presenting Israel and Hamas a final proposal for a hostage release and ceasefire deal in Gaza later this week. And in other news, on Capitol Hill next week, House Speaker Mike Johnson is planning to put a short-term funding bill to a vote to meet the September 30th government shutdown deadline. Johnson is attaching the SAVE Act, which requires proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections, to the measure. While the SAVE Act passed the House with 5 Democratic votes back in July, it is dead on arrival in the Senate. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has repeatedly refused to take it up, and Democrats are saying there's no evidence non-citizens vote in federal elections. Senate Democrats also say the funding level proposed by Johnson's stopgap bill is too low. And speaking of non-citizens, the New York Post is reporting that 75% of the people police have been arresting in Midtown Manhattan for crimes such as assault, robbery, and domestic violence are illegal immigrants. Because New York City is a sanctuary city, NYPD is unable to work with immigration and customs enforcement on cases, according to the New York Post. Additionally, NYPD says it is barred from tracking the immigration status of offenders, making it next to impossible for authorities to get to the bottom of criminal activity. And what's worse, the Post reports, is that word has gotten out among migrants about the city's lax bail policies, meaning migrants know that if they get arrested, they'll be let out on bail several hours later. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says he's called on the New York City Council to change its sanctuary city laws in response to the crime. Now, the story comes after it was reported last week that the Biden-Harris migrant crisis has cost taxpayers $150 billion in a single year. And finally, in other domestic news, the Republican National Committee is suing the North Carolina State Board of Elections for its failure to prevent non-citizens from registering to vote. According to the lawsuit, the state board used a voter registration form that failed to require identification information, such as a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of a social security number. Election officials admitted the form was non-compliant with federal law and eventually fixed it, but in the meantime, approximately 225,000 people registered without supplying the required info. Election officials allegedly refused to take remedial action and did not reach out to these voters to collect the required information. The lawsuit argues that North Carolina officials are opening the door for non-citizens to vote. North Carolina is the first state in the nation to start voting. The battleground state starts mailing out ballots for eligible voters on September 6. And those are today's headlines. I'm Victoria Marshall. Up next is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We'll see you tomorrow with more news and commentary.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Sitting in for Tony is today's host, Jody Heiss.
It is Tuesday, September 3rd. Welcome to this edition of Washington Watch. I am your host, Jody Heiss, Senior Vice President here at the Family Research Council and President of FRC Action, and absolutely delighted to have you on board with us. Coming up on today's program, well, as I mentioned, it's September, which means that we are now less than a month away before a potential government shutdown. So what can we expect in the 3 weeks that Congress will have to work with when they return next week? Well, I'll be discussing this by phone with South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman in just a moment. And the Biden administration is working with Egypt and Qatar on what's being reported as a final take it or leave it deal to free the remaining hostages who are being held by Hamas. Well, this comes after the bodies of 6 of those hostages were recovered by Israeli forces over the weekend, and all of that prompted more pressure, not on Hamas, but on Israel.
These murderers executed 6 of our hostages. They shot them in the back of the head. That's what's changed. And now after this, we're asked to show seriousness? We're asked to make concessions? What message does this send Hamas? It says, kill more hostages, murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions.
Wow. That, of course, was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaking to the press yesterday. And I'll be joined later in the program by Carolyn Glick from the Jewish News Syndicate to discuss the latest. And anti-Israel protesters are at it again, demonstrating today at Columbia University as students made their way back to campus. Never mind the fact that Hamas still has in Gaza more than 60 living hostages and what is believed to be probably about 35 or so bodies of those who are believed to be dead. That, of course, is according to Israeli authorities. And Hamas is now threatening to kill more hostages if Israel tries to free them through military efforts.
The pressure internationally must be directed at these killers, at Hamas, not at Israel. We say yes, they say no all the time, but they also murdered these people. And now we need maximum pressure on Hamas.
That, again, was Prime Minister Netanyahu. Listen, as so much of the world continues to turn on Israel, we've got to ask ourselves this: what do Christians need to keep in mind when confronted by those who question their support for Israel? That's a critically important question these days, and I'll be discussing this with Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries a little bit later in the program. And then there are the latest remarks from former President Trump that has many pro-lifers scratching their heads.
I'm announcing today in a major statement that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for, all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women.
Wow. So again, a very important question. How should pro-life Christians consider the issue of IVF? Well, I'll be discussing this with Katie Faust of Them Before Us a little later in the program. So we've got a lot coming your way, an absolutely packed program. Don't forget our website is tonyperkins.com. As always, there's lots and lots of information there for you, including a link to the Family Research Council's 2024 election survey. Again, we've talked a lot about this, but if you're concerned about the direction that our nation is headed, we urge you to make your voice known, make your voice heard through this election survey. Take a stand. Take a stand for faith, for family, for freedom, and let us know which of the matters are most important to you this election cycle. Your input can help shape the future. Simply text the word election to 67742 to participate. All right, let's jump into our first issue for today. When lawmakers return on Capitol Hill next week, they're going to have till September 30th to pass legislation to prevent a potential government shutdown. And according to reports, Speaker Johnson and the GOP leadership are discussing a plan to move a short-term funding bill, possibly even next week. And that would potentially extend the government funding into March of 2025. And part of the discussion that's being proposed is the SAVE Act, which is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. This is a bill that would ensure that only citizens can vote in federal elections. But it's an uphill battle, and putting the SAVE Act in there might make it even more difficult than what it already may be. So joining me now to discuss this by phone is Congressman Ralph Norman. He serves on several committees, including the Rules Committee and the Budget Committee. He serves the 5th Congressional District of the great state of South Carolina. Congressman Norman, thank you for joining us again on Washington Watch.
Well, great to be with you, Jody. Thank you so much.
Well, it's always an honor to have you, and good to hear your voice. Wish I could see your face, that smiling face, but good to hear your voice. All right, let's talk about what's coming up here. We understand that Speaker Johnson said that the SAVE Act is going to be a big part of this conversation with the potential CR and all the budgeting issues coming up. And this is not just appeasing, if I can use that word, Freedom Caucus, which of course you're a part of, but a lot of other members of the Republican conference support this as well. Can you share with us why this is such an important piece of legislation for those who may not understand just what it is?
Sure, Jody. And, you know, it's interesting we're even having this debate of whether to include this in the CR to put the funding levels into March or April. The SAVE Act puts verification into our voting system. If we don't have open and fair elections, we don't have a republic. We don't have a free republic anymore. And I expect the Democrats to say no. They've been opposed to photo voter ID. They want any alien to be able to vote. That's why the invasion at the border is taking place. And what the SAVE Act does is put penalties for federal officials who don't strictly go by the book to request some type of verification, driver's licenses and other things that they attest to. And then there's a question time to check these things out. And that's what didn't happen in 2020, where, you know, the election was you couldn't contest it because it didn't have time. Now we've got the time to do it. I know South Carolina has written a letter to the Immigration Records Division to make sure that we get the last year of any new registered voters so we can use the database to make sure they are who they are, and that when they check the box that they're an American citizen is true. And, you know, anything else, Jody, you know, for Schumer and I assume McConnell will join in that they're going to shut the government down, that should not be a question at all. If they want to shut it down on having fair elections, then so be it. But this is the first time that anything really has confronted what the Biden administration has allowed to happen, which are 12 to who knows how many millions of illegals in this country. And the purpose, and they're doing it in South Carolina, they're doing it in your home state of Georgia. They're flying them in on our dime and have them check the box and then vote when they shouldn't be. And we're trying to get to the bottom of it, and the SAVE Act does that.
Well, and it just still is a head scratcher to me why anyone would oppose this. Why would anyone be opposed to making sure that only American citizens are voting in our federal elections? It's unbelievable. What do you say to those, Congressman Norman, who make the claim that the SAVE Act would make it more difficult for eligible voters to even register?
Well, the SAVE Act has qualifications. If you're disabled, they make allowances for that. But they use all the available databases that the government has to make sure you are who you say you are and that you've been in this country legally, not illegally. And so it shouldn't even be a point of contention, Jody, at all, because, the verification has to be there. It's like, we're saying I can tell the police all day long I go 55 miles an hour, but let's see what the radar says. All we're saying, all the SAVE Act does is puts the radar in place to prove it, and holds those accountable to who are checking it to make sure they're not doing as we recently found out North Carolina has done, arrested over let over a quarter of a million illegals vote in North Carolina, which has early voting.
Unbelievable. Well, I'm glad you brought up the whole thing with the speed limit, because I know one of the issues I heard a lot when I was there in Congress with you, especially in the Oversight Committee when we were going through all those hearings on election reform. They always said there are already laws that prevent non-citizens from voting in federal elections. But I mean, look, there are already laws that says you can't go over 55 miles an hour too, but people do it all the time. Just because a law says you can't vote if you're illegal does not mean it's not going to happen, and especially when we have a government right now seemingly doing everything they can to encourage it. What do you say to those people who say there's already laws for this?
Well, I would challenge anybody to, yes, there are laws, but what's the verification? What's the process? We don't know how many people in this country. That's the little known fact that's not reported. We don't know, is it 12 million, is it 20 million, is it more? And the borders have been open, as you know, from the day one that the Biden administration took office, and they're doing it to control power. They will do anything, including illegally voting illegals, to retain power. And we just can't buy the argument or let them have the leverage to say, okay, we're going to shut the government down and you're going to pay political consequences. They should pay political consequences, because any American should be for that, but the Democrats are not, because it worked for them before and they want it to work again this time.
Absolutely. Well, I know the SAVE Act passed before, bipartisan, had some Democrat support as well. Do you have any predictions as we move forward?
Well, the good news, I think Mike Johnson, I think he's going to, all indications are he's going to include it. Regardless of the rhetoric that comes from the left, he's going to include it in the CR. He'll put it in March when we'll have, hopefully, the House, Senate, and executive branch. So I applaud him for doing it, but we've got to stay with it. There's no retreat or any deal to make by not having the SAVE Act in there and in law and making them vote on it. And if they in good conscience can cast a vote against it under the guise of shutting a government down that's out of control anyway, Jody. I mean, for us, the spending that we're doing is to build walls in other countries, to pay for illegals coming here for the crimes they're doing, paying for the crimes of those committed by the illegals. No, we can't buy that. We've got to stick tight on it.
Got to stick tight. It is a big leverage. Like you said, without it, there's nothing to stand for. Congressman Ralph Norman, South Carolina, always great to hear your voice. Thanks for joining us again on Washington Watch.
My honor. Thank you, Jody. Bye.
Thank you. All right, on the other side of the break, Carolyn Glick is going to share the latest from Israel, including what's happening with the hostages and the political fallout. So stay tuned. We'll be back in just a moment.
Are you a Christian parent looking to raise a spiritual champion in today's culture? Renowned author George Barna has written a new book, Raising Spiritual Champions. This book offers valuable insights based on extensive research conducted by George Barna, the Family Research Council, and Arizona Christian University. Learn how to help your children discern biblical truth and find compelling meaning and purpose. Don't miss out on this essential resource for parents. Order your copy today.
Hello, I'm Jody Heiss, president of FRC Action. Here in America, we thank God for the right to vote, and we can all agree on the importance of this upcoming election. Many of us want to support candidates who share our values, but we're not comfortable supporting the big national political organizations. Well, we have a solution for supporting candidates through FRC Action's Faith, Family, and Freedom Fund. Being a super PAC, It allows for unlimited individual and corporate donations, so we can endorse and fund campaigns for people who share our values. By giving to this fund, we're able to pull all of our contributions together and support and endorse like-minded candidates. That's how we move the needle. So let's be the best stewards possible and get the most out of our political contributions by uniting our efforts. For more information or to contribute, visit faithfamilyfreedomfund.org. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm Jody Heiss, glad to be filling in today for Tony. All right, yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a special press conference during which he responded to President Biden's claim that he's not doing enough on the hostage negotiations. This all comes as the Biden administration itself has been working with Egypt and Qatar on what's being reported as a final take it or leave it deal. So are we at a tipping point? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Carolyn Glick. She's a senior contributing editor at the Jewish News Syndicate and host of the Carolyn Glick Show on JNS. Carolyn, welcome back to Washington Watch. Always an honor to have you.
Thanks so much for having me on again, Jody. It's great to be with you today.
All right, so let's just start. Fill us in on what the Prime Minister said during his press conference.
Yeah, Prime Minister Netanyahu said a lot of things, but in regard to the issue that you just raised about President Biden's allegation that he isn't doing enough to reach a ceasefire, first of all, he said he couldn't believe that Biden would say that, which was a nice way of saying it's not true, and he said that very clearly. And he said that the administration had put forward a proposal for a ceasefire deal that would bring some of the hostages home in May, and that Israel agreed to it, and that Hamas rejected it. Before that, in April, Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, had said that Israel made an extraordinary offer, that it was now Hamas's turn to accept it. And of course, they rejected that. And then last month, the United States put together another final bridging proposal, is what it was called. And Israel accepted it and Hamas rejected it. Now, Hamas isn't even participating in the negotiations. They put forward an offer that 80% of Israelis reject, according to a poll that I just ran through Jewish News Syndicate, where I work as a senior editor, last night. So, I mean, and 2/3 to 3/4 of Israelis support Netanyahu's positions down the line on everything. And so it was a really interesting poll. But, you see that it's a very strange situation that you have when the United States, which is supposed to be Israel's ally, is putting an extraordinary amount of pressure on Israel to agree to demands from a terrorist organization that's holding 101 now, after executing 101 hostages, 7 of whom are also American citizens. And the United States is demanding that Israel succumb to their demands, that 80% of Israelis reject, and that I would assume that 80% of Americans would reject if they realized what they were. And even telling Hamas that the United States is blaming Israel for the lack of a ceasefire, which is what President Biden did effectively when he said that Netanyahu wasn't doing enough to reach a ceasefire yesterday. And that's one heck of a message to be sending to the terrorist army that's waging a genocidal war.
Yeah, and I wanted to get your take on that because, I mean, Hamas is obviously they've been accusing Israel of dragging months of negotiations, and it sounds like the Biden administration believes this narrative coming from Hamas. But shouldn't he know better than to believe Hamas?
Well, I mean, that's what's so disturbing is that the United States has been mediating these negotiations, and Hamas has been boycotting most of them. You have two Arab states, Egypt and Qatar, that are acting as mediators, and they're supposed to be pressuring Hamas. Israel is supposed to apparently, by their game plan, supposed to be pressured by the United States, and Hamas is supposed to be pressured by their state sponsors, Egypt and Qatar. And they're not actually being pressured by the Egyptians or the Qataris. So the only party that's being pressured to make concessions is Israel. And how do we know that Hamas isn't being pressured? Because it hasn't actually changed its negotiating position since October 8th. So, what they want is a complete Israeli capitulation to all of their demands. They want a total withdrawal of Israeli forces from all of Gaza, from the international border, from the perimeter zone that we set up to protect the cities that Hamas conquered and slaughtered the residents of on October 7th, and then, and then brought 256 Israelis to Gaza as hostages. Now 101 still remain there after nearly a year of captivity. And many of them have been executed, as we saw just most recently with the horrible, monstrous murder of those 6 hostages. So it's an amazing situation that we find ourselves in, where they haven't moved. Their position is exactly the same as it was on October 7th. They just want Israel to lose because they want Israel to be destroyed, and they want to do it. And the United States is pressuring Israel to make more and more concessions to Hamas. And there's no deal, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said very clearly. Prime Minister Netanyahu said very clearly 2 days ago. He said an organization that executes 6 hostages doesn't want to negotiate. They don't want to.
That's exactly right. So, what are you hearing, if anything, on this so-called "take it or leave it" final deal that's being discussed? What do you anticipate is what in there, or what are you hearing is in there? What are your expectations?
Well, I mean, there have been contradictory reports coming out over the past couple of hours. One of the reports, which I found very alarming, and I think that most Americans would as well, is that the Americans are offering that U.S. military contractors would take over the border zone between Gaza and Egypt, which would place them in enormous danger. And granted, they would be effectively, soldiers of fortune, contractors working for not regular American military. But why would the United States want to subject Americans to the very distinct possibility of being kidnapped and murdered by Hamas by putting them there on the border? It's a crazy idea. So I think that's one of the things that have been put forward, and others that, the Prime Minister's office, I think it was the source of the statement that said that Israel expects for the American offer to be looking much like the other ones were, maybe with, increased demands on Israel. But if that's the case also, it won't be something that Israel will agree to. And it's also not something that Hamas will agree to, because why would Hamas agree to any deal? Final deal, next to final deal, an absolutely final deal, a final deal, when all of the pressure is on Israel. If they're not feeling any pressure, they're not going to make any changes in their positions.
Exactly right. And it's just a head-scratching time. And there's a lot of stress and pressure on this end for the way this administration is handling it, and a lot of prayers going out to Israel. Thank you, Carolyn Glick, Senior Contributing Editor of the Jewish News Syndicate. Always an honor to have you on the program. Thank you for keeping us up to speed.
Thanks for having me on. God bless you, Jody. And
God bless you as well. All right, after the break, Them Before Us founder Katie Faust is going to be joining me to dive into the ethical issues surrounding IVF. I assure you, you don't want to miss this timely discussion, and we'll bring it your way in just a moment. Stay tuned.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. I am Jody Heiss, an honor to have you on board with us. Thank you so much for joining. Well, former President Trump still has members of the pro-life community scratching their heads and, frankly, unsure exactly as to what to make of the string of statements that he's come out with regarding the preborn. But on Friday last week, in fact, just as we were heading into this program, Trump told Fox News that he will be voting against Florida's Amendment 4. That's the amendment that we talked about on Friday's program, which seeks to enshrine an absolute right to abortion up to birth in Florida's state constitution. So the fact that Trump is going to be voting against that, we absolutely applaud him for that. But he's also proposed to have the government or insurance companies pay for in vitro fertilization, or IVF. And frankly, that's something even the pro-life community doesn't have a consensus about. So here to offer some insights into all of this is Katie Faust. She's the founder and president of Them Before Us. Katie, welcome back to Washington Watch. It's great to have you.
Always good to be with you, and very grateful that you guys are covering this topic because, as you acknowledge, there is a lot of confusion even among conservatives, even among Christians, when it comes to IVF. And there really is no need to be. We really need to be speaking with one voice on this.
Okay, so let's listen. That's a perfect place for us to begin because the confusion is there. Our tendency as Christians, I think, absolutely is to celebrate anything that has to do with children, it has to do with life. But when it comes to IVF, there's a lot of confusion. So is there a blind spot that we're missing?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is. And it's because we love babies. I love babies. You love babies. We have been working to defend babies for 50 years in the pro-life movement. And so it is a little bit understandable that we might not necessarily know what we're talking about when it comes to things like IVF. I posted on my X account a couple days ago what has now been read a million times, just some facts about IVF that a lot of people don't know. About 2% of children in this country are born every year through IVF. That's about 90,000 children, but that's only a fraction of the children that are created in laboratories, in petri dishes, in glass, IVF, in vitro fertilization. The vast majority of those children, 93 to 97%, are going to lose their life in the baby making process of big fertility. Why? Because parents are routinely encouraged to create many more embryos than they would ever possibly implant or raise. Eugenics is applied to these kids when it comes to deciding which ones live or die, which ones are implanted, which ones are frozen, which ones are discarded, which ones are donated to research. Unfortunately, by the numbers, big fertility destroys more embryonic life every year than the abortion industry does. So the truth is, if we are fighting for children's right to life, we must reject IVF the way that is practiced in almost all forms today.
Well, that's a startling statistic when you understand that more are destroyed there than in the abortion industry as a whole, as we think of it at least. So where's the problem? Is the problem mainly with the IVF industry? Is it with regulations? Is there more to all of this? Where is the root problem here?
Well, some people would say it's a problem to create babies in laboratories to begin with. And that is why you do have some religious communities that completely prohibit the use of reproductive technologies to create children to begin with. If you're making a baby outside the womb, and there's no way for the baby to survive in that environment where you're holding the child's life in their hand. And then, of course, it gets very, very tempting to say, well, we want a boy and not a girl. Well, this baby looks like they don't really make the grade. This one's not as fit. And then you get into the practice of deciding who lives and who dies, sometimes based on very superficial characteristics. What are the other problems? Well, big fertility is virtually regulation free. It has been described accurately as a Wild West. If you can do it and you've got the money, it can be done. Somebody will do it for you. That includes using it as somewhat of a surrogate tourism industry where people will make IVF babies using sperm or egg from all kinds of places implanted in that womb or a surrogate's womb. Travel here, pick them up, fly home, have a foothold for American citizenship as a result of it. We definitely see this very disturbing trend of same-sex couples or single men who are creating children using surrogates, always with the help of IVF. Of those 90%, of those 90,000 children born every year, 30 to 60,000 of them are going to be created using sperm or egg donors. So those children are going to lose their mother and father right at the moment of conception. And so there's no rules against any of these practices, eugenically screening children, cutting them off from their mother or father. Unfortunately, this is not a child-friendly industry, no matter how you splice it.
Katie, we've only got about a minute left. What do you say to those who are struggling with fertility issues and right now they're maybe considering IVF?
You have got to make sure that you are not forcing the least of these, forcing the weak children to sacrifice on your behalf. This is the message that we at Them Before Us talk about regularly. Throughout this world of marriage and family and parenthood, you are going to come across problems and challenges and struggles. And in all of those situations, someone is going to have to do the hard thing. It will either be the adults who work, reform, figure out a way to solve their problems without violating the rights of kids, or it will be kids that do hard things on behalf of adults. If you're struggling with infertility, which is a crushing burden, I would really encourage you to seek alternatives like NAPRO Technologies, which identifies and resolves the underlying fertility issues, so you don't have to be dependent on a fertility doctor to have the babies that you so desperately long for.
Thank you so much, Katie Faust, founder and president of Them Before Us, which, by the way, is a great name. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch. We appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Go to thembeforeus.com, subscribe, fund our work. We are fighting on behalf of kids, and we'd love to have you join us.
Thank you so much. All right, friends, on the other side of the break, Dr. Jeff Myers, author of Should Christians Support Israel, is going to join me to answer that very question. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a second.
Join us October 3rd through the 6th as we gather with spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives from across America at the Pray, Vote, Stand Summit in Washington, D.C. We'll pray for our nation, engage in government and culture, and stand for biblical truth alongside Christian leaders, worldview experts, and government officials. We'll discuss important issues like the sanctity of life, religious freedom, protecting students, strengthening families, praying for our nation, and how you can impact America's future from a biblical worldview. Our nation stands at a critical juncture, and we must ensure that the issues impacting faith, family, and freedom are understood and advanced. Register now at PrayVoteStand.org. That's PrayVoteStand.org.
Jesus said in John 15, "These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full." In 2024, in these divided and uncertain times, how can this be possible? By abiding in Him through His Word. At Family Research Council, we want to help you do that, which is the reason for the Stand on the Word Bible reading plan. In just 10 to 15 minutes each day, you will have read the entire Bible in just 2 years. But more importantly, you will be abiding in Him daily. Find our Bible reading plan at frc.org/Bible. And join Tony Perkins each weekday for a 10-minute devotional inspired by the daily reading and designed to encourage you on this journey through the Bible. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And remember, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever.
Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these sage cons yourself, join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Jody Heiss, and glad to have you joining us today. All right, just a reminder, the Pray Vote Stand Summit is coming your way on October 3rd through the 6th in Washington, D.C., and we would love to have you come join us for this special occasion. For more information or to register today, visit the website PrayVoteStand.org. PrayVoteStand.org, and we look forward to seeing you on October 3rd. Also, I want to once again encourage you to make your voice heard with Family Research Council's 2024 election survey. We're all concerned about the direction our nation is headed, and we'd love to hear your voice, your thought about all of that and what's most important to you headed into this election cycle coming up in just a couple of months. To have your voice heard, let us hear it. Simply text the word election to 67742, and you can participate in that survey. Again, that is election to 67742. Okay. In the wake of the recovery, and I'm sure you've heard of it by now, the 6 hostages' bodies, including that of an Israeli American, renewed protests over Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of this ongoing hostage crisis and war. It's all reignited. And many, perhaps even some who are listening and watching the program right now, many are wondering, should Christians even support Israel? Well, here to answer that very important question is Dr. Jeff Myers. He's the president of Summit Ministries. He's also the author of the book, Should Christians Support Israel? Seeking a Biblical Worldview in an Impossible Situation. Dr. Jeff Myers, always great to see you, my friend. Welcome back to Washington Watch.
And it's great to see you, Jody. Yeah, remember, this is such a heartbreaking topic, and I'm glad that you're addressing it.
Well, listen, I am glad that you have written your book, and I'm honored to have that and to go over some of the incredibly important issues, all this. So let's just jump into some of it. One of the big questions that your book tackles is the question, is this Israeli war against Hamas justified? What's your answer to that?
Well, I spent a lot of time on the ground there in the war zone, Jody, talking to IDF officials, intelligence officers, journalists who on the left and the right, secular Jews, religious Jews, Palestinians, Arab, Israeli citizens. And I have come to conclude that this war is just. There are three things that, from a Christian standpoint, happen in a just war. First is you have a legitimate government, and Israel is a legitimate government. You may not like how it came into existence, but it does exist and it's legitimate. Second of all, that it has a just cause. And this is not just about an October 7th attack of slaughter and rape and mayhem. That's horrifying enough. But Hamas has been doing this same kind of thing for decades. 770 suicide attacks, more than 30,000 missiles that it has shot into Israel. It's remarkable that the Israelis were self-disciplined enough to not react to all of those previous slights, with this kind of military force. But the fact is, evil has to be destroyed. You cannot allow it to exist. You cannot have a shameful peace. You have to have a just one. And then the third one is that the war is done with right intent. And I think all three of those criterion are met.
That's a great perspective. It's like a 30,000-foot view to look at this whole thing. And when you look at it and talk about it in those terms, it's hard to argue any of those points. So let's go into Gaza itself. I mean, Gaza, frankly, is synonymous with Arab Palestinians, but Gaza has a very specific role in Israel's history, in their story. And in fact, you open the book with a chapter and by that title, The Gates of Gaza. Tell us about that.
Well, about 1,300 or so BC, so before Christ, there was a guy in Israel named Samson who went to Gaza to visit a prostitute. And he was told, in the morning, these guys are going to tie you up and take you captive. And so at midnight, he arose and took the gates of Gaza. Scripture specifically says it was the gates of Gaza. He took those gates, ripped them off, and carried them to a hill overlooking Hebron. Scripture specifies all of this in the book of Judges. And those gates were probably 4,000 pounds. He carried them 36 miles. Hebron's important because that's the grave of Abraham, the patriarch of the Jewish faith. And so here you have this degenerate patriarch carrying the gates of Gaza, the defense that its enemies had, to the feet of Abraham. And is a remarkable example because 100 years later, that physical act of prophecy was fulfilled when David fought against Goliath and routed the Gazan army. So this is not a new conflict. This is one that has been going back literally thousands of years.
Wow. That's a part of Scripture. People don't connect those dots and how powerful that is to kind of, I mean, my mind just starts going 100 different directions as you even bring that up. But your book, you also talk about the Israel that we haven't heard about. All right, so part of what you just shared, many people have not heard about, but let's go into this a little bit further. What is this version of Israel that you're referring to when you speak about the Israel that we've not heard about?
Well, there have been three Israels, essentially, in history. The first one that was established by Joshua, and he brought the children of Israel into the Promised Land. That ultimately collapsed because of the Israelites' disobedience. It was reformed hundreds of years before Jesus. And then this third one, which began in 1948. Israel's a tiny strip of land in the Middle East, but it is about everything everywhere. That entire region was settled. A lot of people say, oh, 1948, that's new, that's not legitimate. Every single nation in that region, Jody, was formed between 1943 and 1948. And Israel today has as its basic law, basically the book of Deuteronomy. It has Jewish traditions built into it. Even its flag is based on a Jewish prayer shawl. And that leads many people, including me, to conclude that this is the continuation of a nation that was disrupted by the Roman general and Emperor Hadrian all the way back between AD 70 and AD 130 or so. This is now reconstituted. And it is legitimately formed. 2/3 of the nations in the United Nations voted to form Israel. Palestine was invited to form a nation at the same time, and they refused. And they have refused every time it's been offered since 1948, 1967, 2000, and 2008, primarily because the leaders of the Palestinians, who are Arab, believe that as long as Israel exists, then they will never form a state. They do not want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution with Israel being annihilated. Hamas in particular is very strident about this. They've written about it in their documents. They've publicly declared this. This is not a secret. This is something that every person in leadership in the United States of America needs to know.
So let's, if we can, let's broaden this up. Because over all of this is the question that I hear frequently, and it goes something like this. Should Christians even be involved in politics? As believers, isn't the main thing just the gospel? And should we even have a role in politics? Yeah. And I know you've spoken extensively about this, but let's go down that path, because this certainly comes into the whole issue when people are wondering, should we even be supporting Israel? This is part of it.
It absolutely is. And the timing of your question is really profound, because today we're releasing a new video course at Summit Ministries that is free to everybody who is watching. It's called Should Christians Avoid Politics? And you just go to summit.org/politics and you can download a copy to show to your small group. This question is huge, because 65% of people say when they think about politics, they feel aggravated or anxious. 55% say it makes them feel angry. Only 4% say they feel excited. What we've gotten confused about, Jody, in our time is we've begun to think of a vote as a like on social media, but a vote is not a like. A vote is a hiring decision. As someone who's been in public office, you know that that's true. You can't just say, oh, well, I've got to vote and maybe I'll use it or not. No, you got to vote, you got to vote.
Absolutely. And listen, by the way, I'm glad the timing was great. That video series is going to be awesome. One more time, real quickly, before I go on to the next question, tell people how they get to that video.
Yeah, you just come on the internet to Summit Ministries website, which is summit.org, and then / I think it is, just politics, just the word politics. And you can download that video course, 6 15-minute sessions about how to think about this, and especially to move people who are reluctant into action.
All right, that's awesome. All right, summitministries.org/politics. All right, so let's go this a little bit further. What about the myth, we'll put it that way, that starts with the presumption that God is not concerned about politics? What do you say to that?
I've always found this fascinating, Jody, because people say, well, God only cares about what happens in church on Sunday morning. It just isn't true. Scripture says that God's glory covers all of the earth. God cares about everything, everywhere, all the time. It is because of his glory that he chose us to be his image bearers, and we have responsibilities here on earth. Christian thinkers throughout history have talked about this. They said one of the important responsibilities of believers is to be citizens of the kingdom of God and also citizens in the kingdom of man. Augustine of Hippo, the great Christian philosopher, said the citizens in the kingdom of God will always be the best citizens in the kingdom of man because they have an allegiance to something that is higher than the state. If there is no God, then the government is God. And Christians know better. Who else knows better? If Christians don't get involved, who's going to bring that perspective to bear?
Great point. Well, let me bring this one up, because this one came out with me just yesterday in a conversation I was having with someone. And basically they said, look, it's not my problem. And they literally made this comment, which I'm sure you've heard as well, that when we go vote, all we're doing is voting the lesser of two evils, or we're trying to determine which is the lesser of two evils. What do you say about that kind of mentality, that that's all we're doing is choosing the lesser of two evils?
I've talked a lot about this with my students at Summit Ministries, Jody, and I just ask them a couple of simple questions. Do both candidates for that particular office have a sin nature? And the answer is yes. Do we have a sin nature? The answer is yes. So we're not asking the question, how do we choose between the lesser of two evils? What we should be asking is, how do we use our vote to lessen evil? I go back to the Constitution. What does it say? We cannot deprive people of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. I start with life. To me, that's critically important. It is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. I apply that all throughout life from the very beginning, even in the womb. If somebody says, I can't support that, then I wonder, how can they support the Constitution? If they're willing to disenfranchise one group of people, well, what would stop them from disfranchising another group of people? And then I do the same thing with the question of liberty. Does this elected official understand that we do not work for them, that they work for us, that the whole point of government is not to take away our liberty, it is to secure the rights that have been given to us by God? And I know this is very controversial, but it seems very straightforward. The government does not give you your rights. According to the Declaration of Independence, our rights are given to us by God and secured by the government.
Absolutely, and that's one reason it's very concerning that we now have two parties, neither of which has a platform that acknowledges what you just said. Any mention of God is just in adjective form rather than declaration that he is the author of our rights. So what about this, that politics really isn't even all that important?
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Well, here's how I process that as a Christian, and I'm speaking primarily to other people who say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I believe in God. They may not have a lot of insight into, they may not have thought about it a lot. I mean, we're busy, think about a lot of things. But here's how I process that. Jesus said in John 8:32, if you follow my teachings, you will be my disciples and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. In the original language, that word truth is reality. Jesus is not saying, follow my teachings and you will know your truth. You'll feel better about yourself. He said, follow my teachings and reality itself will open up to you. So if Christians really do believe that Jesus opens up truth for us, people who deny Jesus don't understand the full truth. So if we withdraw from the process, what we're saying is, by my not being involved, I want unreality or fantasy to prevail rather than reality.
Excellent point. And this is all what it means to be salt and light. It isn't, by definition, it is impossible to be salt and light if you're disengaged. And we need to keep in mind that God instituted government. This is not a man-made thing. It's one of the institutions that God created, and for us to be absent of it is really to live in disobedience when it comes to being salt and light in the world in which we live.
There's no question. And it's amazing to me. We need to think about how much every single vote in an election matters. This current election cycle at every level is going to be decided in most cases by 1% to 2% of the people. That is about 1,000 people in each of America's 1,300 counties. We're not talking about something where our vote doesn't really matter in the bigger scheme of things. It matters absolutely at every level.
Enormously, it matters. Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries, cannot thank you enough. You've been a hero for a long, long time. It's always great to see you, my friend. Thank you for joining us on Washington Watch.
Great to see you, Jody. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, friends, that wraps up this edition of Washington Watch. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a fantastic evening, and we'll see you again tomorrow right here on Washington Watch.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com.